All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be digging into something that's, well, it's pretty crucial for anyone who deals with utility fleets, those bucket trucks and digger derricks that, well, keep everything running.
Yeah, those workhorses that keep our infrastructure going.
Exactly. We're talking about hydraulic hoses, those unsung heroes that, well, sometimes cause some pretty big headaches.
Absolutely.
So we've been poring over this fascinating article in Utility Fleet Professional by Jim Olson and Craig Ries from Terex Utilities. They really get into the nitty-gritty of why these things fail, the safety risks, and how to keep them in tip-top shape. And that's what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, it's a deep dive into a topic that's way more important than, well, a lot of people might realize at first glance.
For sure. So to kick things off, why don't we jump right into those safety hazards? Because, when these hoses fail, it's not just an inconvenience. It can be downright dangerous.
You got it. And understanding the risks is the first step in, really appreciating why we got to pay so much attention to these hoses.
Right. Now, it's interesting. The article points out that hydraulic oil itself, when it's contained, it's non-conductive. But the moment a hose bursts, well, things get dicey pretty fast.
Yeah, it becomes a whole different ballgame.
First off, burns. Hot oil under high pressure. Not something you want to mess with.
Absolutely. We're talking severe burns instantly. And it's not just about direct contact.
Right. They talk about this oil mist that can form when a hose fails. It's like, I don't know, something out of a movie, but it's a real fire hazard.
Oh, yeah. Highly flammable stuff, that mist. A spark, an arc, anything like that, and boom, you've got a fire on your hands.
Not good. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of the equipment going down because, well, the reservoir's empty.
Yep. What starts as a small leak can escalate really quickly. And that downtime, it hits your productivity and your wallet.
No kidding. And they mentioned that if the system runs dry or gets contaminated because of a failed hose, well, you might be looking at some hefty repair bills for that hydraulic pump.
Definitely. Those pumps are not cheap to fix. But there's another danger that they bring up, and it's a bit more, well, I guess you could say insidious.
Yeah.
Vacuum flashover.
Yeah, that one caught my attention too. What exactly is going on there?
So imagine this. You've got a boom, an insulating boom, and a hydraulic line fails. It can actually create a vacuum inside that boom structure. And if that vacuum messes with the insulating properties of the boom, it can actually become conductive.
Ooh, that's not good.
Yeah.
Especially if you're working around power lines.
Exactly. Especially at those higher voltages, you're looking at a serious electrocution risk. They call it vacuum flashover, and it's not something you want to experience firsthand.
Definitely not. So even though the oil itself isn't conductive, a hose failure can create this whole other set of electrical hazards. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, the domino effect, you could say. And even if we're not talking about these dramatic failures, even small leaks can cause problems, right?
Right. They talk about how leaks can mess with the functional pressure of the entire system.
Yep. You lose efficiency, the equipment doesn't perform the way it should, and it can even become unsafe to operate.
So bottom line, you got to stay on top of these hoses. And the article really hammers home the importance of inspections. Daily walkarounds, the manufacturer's recommended inspections, it's all got to be part of the routine.
Couldn't agree more. Those inspections, they're your early warning system, and they offer some really practical advice on how to do those checks safely.
Yeah, like wearing safety glasses and gloves. It seems obvious, but, sometimes those basics get overlooked.
It happens. And another thing, never use your bare hands to check for leaks. Use a piece of cardboard or wood, something to keep your skin away from that pressurized fluid.
Smart. And that's not just because of the hot oil, right?
Yeah.
They talk about fluid injection injuries, and those can be, pretty nasty.
Yeah, incredibly serious. You might not even see a puncture wound, but that fluid gets in there under high pressure, and it can do some real damage internally.
Scary stuff. So what do they say to do if, God forbid, that happens?
Cold pack right away and get to a doctor, and not just any doctor, one who knows about high pressure injection injuries, and tell the paramedics, the ER staff, everyone what kind of fluid it was, what the pressure was, all that info. It can make a huge difference.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about the risks, the importance of inspections. Now let's get into the why. Why do these hoses fail in the first place? The article breaks down some common causes, right?
Yeah, they do a good job of laying it out. Overheating is a big one, which makes sense when you think about how hard these machines work.
Right. And they give some clues to look for. With those orange non-conductive hoses, if they start to feel soft or they get discolored, brownish, especially when it's hot out, that's a bad sign.
Oh, yeah. That means the hose material is starting to break down, basically cooking from the inside out. And it's important to remember, the whole system's operating temperature limit is determined by that orange non-conductive hose, specifically what the manufacturer says it can handle. You go above that, and you're playing with fire.
Literally. Then there's weather, specifically UV damage. Both the orange non-conductive and the wire braid hoses are susceptible, but it seems like it affects them differently.
It does. The orange non-conductive hose, it's more vulnerable to that UV radiation. Over time, it can break down that outer layer, expose the fiber braid underneath, and then it's not non-conductive anymore. That braid can soak up moisture, and that's a problem.
So it's not just about the hose breaking, it's about losing that non-conductive protection.
Exactly. And the wire braid hoses, they're tougher against UV, but it still takes its toll. They can get hard, brittle, start to crack, and then that wire braid underneath, it can rust. Not a good look for something that needs to be flexible and hold pressure.
So both types have their weaknesses. And then, of course, there's just plain old wear and tear, cuts, nicks, abrasions, all those fun things.
Right. All that flexing and rubbing, it takes its toll. Any visible damage like that, you got to take it seriously, inspect it carefully, and maybe even replace the hose. And figuring out what caused that damage in the first place, well, that's preventative maintenance gold.
For sure. Then we've got improper assembly or installation. This seems like a place where, well, mistakes can happen. Misaligned hoses, improperly crimped ends, that kind of thing.
Yeah, human error can definitely creep in here. They talk about how easy it is to twist a hose during installation, especially because those fittings can rotate independently. You install it twisted, and you're just asking for trouble.
And they say the best way to avoid that is the two-wrench method. Hold one fitting steady while you tighten or loosen the other one. Simple but effective.
It is. And then there's the whole world of crimping hose ends. That's a lot more involved than you might think.
It is. They stress that the hose ends, they're not all created equal. Different manufacturers, different types of hoses, it all matters.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure the crimp die, the hose, and the fitting, they all play nice together.
Exactly. Use the wrong stuff, and you're setting yourself up for a headache down the road. And then they bring up worn crimp dies, something you might not think about right away. Even if you've got the right components, a worn die can mess up the whole crimp.
And a bad crimp, that can be a big deal.
Yeah.
They talk about undercrimping, where the hose end could blow off, which is obviously dangerous, and then overcrimping, which can actually damage the hose itself.
Yeah, you got to get it just right. It's all about that sweet spot. And for Terex customers, they highlight a great resource: ordering pre-assembled hoses by part number through their online portal. That takes a lot of the guesswork out of it.
Smart move. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. But let's get to the, I guess you could say, the emergency procedures. What happens if a hose actually fails while the equipment's in use? They lay out some pretty clear steps depending on where you are, right?
Absolutely. Platform, vehicle bed, ground, they've got you covered. The main idea is to stop the flow of oil as quickly and safely as possible.
Makes sense. So let's say you're up in the platform and a hose goes.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you do?
Release whatever function you were using and shut off the tool valve if there is one.
Got it. Then what?
Hit that stop control. That'll divert the flow back to the reservoir, take the pressure off, and if you've got an engine stop-start switch up there, use it, and if you need help, call for it. Don't try to be a hero.
Good advice. What about if you're down in the vehicle bed and something goes wrong?
Move the control selector for the upper controls to the lower position. That'll shut off the flow to the up part of the system. And again, if you've got an engine stop-start, use it.
Okay, and what about someone on the ground who sees a hose fail?
Shut off the engine, disengage the power takeoff, that's what sends power to the pump, and move the control selector for the failed function to the opposite position. And yeah, engine stop-start if you've got it.
Got it. So oil flow stopped. What's next?
Figure out where the failure is, but be careful. Make sure it's safe to approach, use your PISTE, all that good stuff. They also mention a trick if the failure is between the upper and lower controls. Sometimes operating from the lower controls can actually slow down the oil leak and maybe even let you lower the device safely.
Interesting. So there are options depending on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if there's anyone up in the platform, you might need another aerial device to get them down safely.
Right. And no matter what, call in the experts for the repairs. This isn't DIY territory.
For sure. Now, the article also gives us a little background on the authors, Jim Olson and Craig Ries.
Yeah, they're both from Terex Utilities.
Right. Jim Olson's a senior product engineer, been in the business since, get this, 1986. Talk about experience.
Wow. And Craig Ries, he's a product safety engineer, been working with this type of equipment since 2005. So yeah, they know their stuff.
No doubt. It's good to know the information's coming from people who really understand the ins and outs of these machines.
Absolutely.
Now, toward the end of the article, they throw in some tidbits about the industry in general.
Yeah, some context. They mention EUFMC 2024, the big fleet management conference. Apparently, it was a record year for attendance. Lots of fleet folks, manufacturers, suppliers, all there. It shows how much collaboration's going on in this sector.
That's cool. And they talk about this guy, Scott Griffith, the new CEO of Motive, an electric truck company. They highlight his tech background, which makes sense given the whole push towards electric vehicles.
Right. It's a changing landscape, and it seems like they're bringing in the people with the right expertise to navigate it.
And finally, they mentioned the Shift Group. They've partnered with Amerit Fleet Solutions to provide maintenance for their Blue Arc electric vehicles. And those Blue Arc EVs are becoming more available through dealerships that have trained technicians. So it seems like the support infrastructure for these electric fleets is coming along nicely.
Yeah, it's all starting to come together.
So even though we focused on hydraulic hoses today, it's good to see the bigger picture. But bringing it back to our main topic, what are the key things you want our listener to walk away with?
I think it boils down to this: regular inspections, knowing what causes hoses to fail, and having a plan if something does go wrong. Those are the pillars of safe and efficient operation.
Absolutely. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Yeah. Catch a problem early, and you save yourself a lot of trouble down the road.
Couldn't agree more. And it makes me wonder, with all the advances in technology, what's the future of hydraulic hose maintenance? Are we going to see some really cool new tools, new training methods, something that takes it to the next level?
That's a great question. Something for our listeners to think about as they keep those hoses flowing and those fleets running.
Food for thought.
Absolutely.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss any actions or policy changes with your management prior to implementation.